Welcome to another episode of the Live Happy, Healthy, and Inspired podcast. The podcast all about learning how to live a happy, healthy, and inspired life. I'm your host, Brad, a once upon a time overweight, lethargic, low self-esteem couch potato that turned it all around. My mission now is to empower you, the listener, with the strategies, tips, and advice for what it takes so that you too can live happy, healthy, and inspired. Feeling overwhelmed, exhausted, and stretched too thin? In today's episode, I sit down with money and confidence coach Dr. Danielle Angela to tackle career burnout, especially for women juggling work, home, and motherhood. Key takeaways from today's episode include signs you're experiencing burnout and how to address it, practical strategies for creating balance in your daily life, and how to prioritize self-care without feeling guilty. Stay tuned all the way to the end for Danielle's powerful advice on reclaiming your energy and balancing the different aspects of your life. Well, welcome once again, everybody. I'm your host, Brad, and this is the Live Happy, Healthy, and Inspired podcast. And today with us, coming almost near to me, my next door neighbor over in Missouri, Danielle. Danielle, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Our states technically are neighbors. They're Missouri and Oklahoma are border states. So yes,
They are neighbors.
we're
Yeah.
we're hours apart from each other, but our states are neighbors for sure.
And it's rare. I have a guest that's actually in the same time zone as me too, so that's kind of nice. But Danielle, you have a plethora of a background, and we'll get to your website and all that here eventually. But we were talking earlier and wanted to specifically focus on today because my target audience a lot are women, 35 to 65, about this idea of burnout, and specifically women in particular. I think have a much bigger challenge, I guess I'll say, when it comes to career, and then also balancing everything else as a woman is expected to do, the home, the house, the wife duties, all of that stuff. And this is something you actually coach and teach women how to balance all of that with establishing like a business or something like that. So let's kind
Yes.
of begin at the beginning because I'm curious with burnout. What would you say burnout is, and what's causing it specifically for women?
Well, thank you for asking that because I teach this topic for continuing education courses for physicians so they understand how to diagnose and manage burnout in their patient population. But I also kind of like sneak in for them what they should know for themselves because care providers are at such a high risk of burnout. And almost all of the research that exists on this topic focuses on nurses and doctors.
Mhm.
But there are lots of other people that also experience burnout. It's basically the same phenomenon as what a nurse or doctor would experience. The feeling state is very much the same. So I think it's important to start off with like really being clear on what is burnout because it's a word that we use in our common language, and
It is. Yeah.
um, it can mean different things to different people, right? So when I describe burnout, I use the clinical definition, which has three parts, and one of those three parts specifically is emotional exhaustion. And I know a lot of the women listening in the age range that you described for me of your listeners, they're feeling that emotional exhaustion, right? Like they've probably been doing a lot for a lot of people for a long time, and they've done that because they care about other people, but also because perhaps maybe they haven't had strong boundaries. They
Mhm.
hadn't learned how to prioritize themselves. No one taught them that that was okay to do.
Yeah.
And they've
Yeah.
been carrying so much for so long that they literally reach this point where they're emotionally exhausted. So that's really the hallmark feature of burnout is the emotional exhaustion. Um, there's another feature of it called depersonalization, which if you read the clinical definition of depersonalization, it can actually sound a bit scary, some of the symptoms of depersonalization, but I simplify depersonalization as in our common language.
I know what it's like to struggle with weight loss, lack motivation, and feel lost with no purpose. I've been there. This was me, overweight, unmotivated, and battling low self-esteem. But I took back my life, and now I'm here to help you do the same. My book, Take Back Your Life, is your guide to breaking through these challenges. It's time to reclaim your health, motivation, and self-worth. Readers are saying, a life-changing guide helped me find my purpose and the boost I needed to transform. Start your journey today. Let's take back your life together.
It's more like feeling disconnected from yourself. And then a sense of apathy is the third characteristic. It's like I'm not doing as good of a job as I used to do. I used to keep it all together. I used to like have all the cupcakes baked for all the classroom parties and also show up to work on time with my makeup on and my hair done and also, go to the, I don't know, I'm making this up. And also go to the PTO meetings and also volunteer for this other position and be on this board and run around to soccer games and practices all weekend. But I'm not keeping up with the laundry and the dishes anymore. So there's that's like the third feature of burnout is just like this sense of I'm not able to perform at the level that I once was able to.
Okay. And is all this being brought about by societal expectations or just having too much on the to-do list or something like that? Or,
That's such a loaded question. And I think that there's a lot that goes into the question of how did we get here, essentially? How did we get to this
yeah.
space where not only women, but all kinds of people are feeling this really overwhelming sense of emotional exhaustion and overwhelm and burden? So, I mean, of course, there's a lot of like history that led us to this point, but I think that one of the key things I hope to inspire in people is not so much like going and digging around in the past to see why did this happen, but
Mhm.
more so like what do I need to do right now to fix this problem for me and those closest to me? Because yes, the systemic things are important, but we largely don't have control over them. And the only thing that we do have control over is ourselves, really. And when you are overwhelmed, run down, burned out, it's really hard to expect to take on some kind of, world change or like global change, cultural shift. You've got to just focus on yourself. And that's really the key to overcoming burnout is prioritizing yourself.
So how does a career woman do that has 50 million being pulled in 50 million different directions? How do they prioritize themselves?
Yeah, you've got to start by being clear with yourself about what you need to say no to. So that might mean not volunteering for the PTO, not baking the cupcakes for every class party or even any class parties. It might mean that, if you have children and they're in multiple sports, like they may not be in multiple sports anymore.
That's a
And it's
tough.
hard because, again, one of the key features that brings people to this place where they feel so run down is having done so much for other people. And now you might feel like you're letting other people down. But this is a point in life where we get to stop thinking in short-term chunks of time and thinking about the long term. And this is one of the things that really helped me make this shift for myself in the way that I mother and how I was prioritizing my time because I've experienced burnout a couple of times over the last decade or decade and a half now. I had to start thinking about how do I want to be for my own children when they're having their children, which at this point I would expect to be perhaps 10 years away or longer. And so, like, what do I need to do right now to be able to show up for them in that way? Right. So, if when my children are having their own children, I want to be able to help them physically, that means I need to be healthy enough and mobile enough to be able to do that. I also need to have the financial freedom and the location freedom to be able to go wherever they may live and stay for as long as they want me to. And that meant that I need to start doing things differently now, right? And that might mean, yes, we're not going to be doing all of the after school activities, but we're not doing all the after school activities because this is what's going to get us to the long term goal that we want, or really that I want. I want to be able to be the mom that's there for my own daughters if they want me to be there, of course.
Now, just curious. So, as a mom, how do you set that boundary with the child that says, "Sorry, we can't do this after school activity now," or something like that?
That's been a oh, that's been a hard lesson for me to learn because as I've grown over the last few years as a mother myself of three children, three daughters, one of the things that has become really clear to me is like the way that I was parenting, I was letting my kids have a lot of authority. And it was actually very unclear in our family dynamic who's in charge here.
Oh,
And so I've been working for a couple of years now on like reshifting or shifting the family dynamics so that my children know I'm in charge as an adult in my household, and that they may not always agree with me, but that I have the final word. The reason that this was hard for me was probably multiple layers of it, but first and foremost, I just wanted them to love me. I just wanted them to be happy, right? And I didn't want to do things that might make them upset.
right,
But
right.
again, I've had to learn to be able to hold myself through their discomfort and know that like they might be uncomfortable right now, but in the long term, this is what I believe to be the best for them, for me, for all of us.
Yeah. So, what are some
It's
tips?
kind of a maturing process, really.
Yeah, what are some tips you would share with other moms listening right now who are facing that same challenge that you were learning to say no or learning to set those more defined boundaries with children that, hey, I'm in charge. Was it a
Hmm. Well,
self-confidence thing that had to come through or something like that? Or
oh man, for me, it's still work in progress. I will give the disclaimer right up front. I am no parenting expert, and I'm still learning how to be a better mother. One of the things that has helped me is sort of like increasing my tolerance for other people's discomfort, right? So there's a couple of ways that this relates to burnout too, because when we're taught to always say yes to other people, we're essentially people pleasing. And that's one of the key behavioral aspects that leads women, especially to a diagnosis of burnout. People pleasing means that we're always saying yes when sometimes we actually mean no,
mm,
or vice versa. You know, that sometimes we say no when we actually mean yes to ourselves or to something else. But the essence of it is that we are doing things to please other people and to seem nice when actually the kind thing to do would be to be honest instead. So for me, it's just been a practice of increasing my capacity to be okay with myself, even when people are not okay with me, or at least what they perceive to be not okay with me.
yeah. So many questions I want to ask you on this, but trying to stay on topic directly with burnout. What are some other steps that women listening now can take to if they're experiencing burnout, even if they haven't been diagnosed or anything? Is burnout
Mhm.
is that a formal medical diagnosis as well? I don't even know that. But is what
It
are some
is.
other,
It
is
is.
oh,
Yeah.
wow. What are some more specific steps that women can take then dealing with burnout? You mentioned about learning to, set boundaries and say no, well, and prioritize yourself. Are there some other things out there women can do?
So, yes. Okay. So let's clarify. First things first, I believe that we need to start eliminating things from our commitments, or like eliminating things from our schedules, right? So that we're actually freeing up more time for rest, which is a huge priority if you like becomes a huge priority if you are experiencing burnout. And it's such a high priority that it'll feel uncomfortable to have the space open up when you're not overcommitted, but again, it's a practice of like learning to be okay with slowing down, learning to be okay with having less things to do and just more time for being a human. Ultimately, though, that space allows you to become a better person for all of the people around you. And then, yes, prioritizing your own needs. So this is tricky because as we've been raising children for, decades in some cases, we often lose sight of what are my needs? What is it that fills me up? What does resource me? What helps me feel recharged? I know for me, what recharges me is really simple. It's just having time alone where there's nobody asking me any questions. Literally, no one's talking to me.
I'll stop
I guess
talking. I
it's an
won't ask you
introverted trait,
anything
but that's it's kind of ironic, right? That like the thing that recharges me is to be alone and to not be talking to people. But that's what I do for a profession. So I also have to be very cognizant of that for myself. Like I talk for a living, essentially. I talk to other people, sometimes just to my microphone, recording a podcast, but I have to give myself that time where there is no talking happening on my part or on anyone else's so that I can recharge and I can be ready to give in that way. So it's kind of again, it's a process of relearning for a lot of women. What is it that helps you feel like you? What is it that helps you feel like a human being, not just a human doing for other people? And it can take some experimenting to really figure out what fills you up and is not just a thing that you think you should be doing. So, an example of this might be, oh, well, yoga sounds like something that would be really beneficial for me. Maybe even someone suggested it or recommended it, right? So you start going to yoga class once or twice a week, and it just feels like another thing on your to-do list. Okay, then it needs to come off of your to-do list and off of your schedule. And maybe instead of going to a yoga class, you just lay down.
Take a nap.
It
Yeah,
sounds
that works.
almost silly to say, right? Like that's the harder thing. That's the harder thing. And the scheduling of all the things and the commitments and the classes and the training and the education is what leads so many women to burnout in the first place. The harder thing is to not have something scheduled and to just literally go lay down on the couch or take a nap instead of going to a class.
I'm,
So
well, I'm curious.
practice figuring out what is it that fills you up and isn't just another commitment.
Mm, mm. I'm curious. So, as you learn to prioritize yourself and whatnot, and learn to say no, have you experienced any pushback from like society or maybe family or something like that? And hey, you should be doing this when you're like, no, no, I can't. I'm really burnt out. I need to, just rest right now or something. Have you experienced any like pushback like that, or how did you deal with it? Or if a woman listening right now is experiencing that pushback, what could you tell her?
Honestly, I haven't. Not in an overt kind of way, at least. I think the people that I was most concerned about and still probably am most concerned about having any pushback from when I say no to something is my children. But what I have found is that when I'm just clear and firm in my no, they adapt. Like they've actually adapted quite well over time. They were used to basically getting whatever they wanted from me. And now they understand that I'm not going to say yes all the time. It's not just that easy. And outside of my kids, I mean, I don't think there's anyone else in my life that has said anything negative or harmful or that had me question, am I actually being selfish? Um, Part of that could also be that I have curated the people in my life so that um, they are they're like-minded people. They understand, that we do need to put ourselves first.
And so now how is your life these days once you've learned to set these boundaries? I guess the opposite, what would you say the opposite of burnout is then, like thriving maybe? And are you more in a thriving stage of life now?
Everything is literally perfect. I'm kidding. Um, am I in more of a thriving stage? Yes, for sure. Are things absolutely perfect in my life all the time? Absolutely not.
Okay.
Um, is that is it still worth it to have reorganized my life several times so that I am protecting my longevity, protecting my ability to be present with my children, present with them now and also in the future when they're adults in whatever capacity they choose for that to be um, able to travel for as long as I want to. It's totally worth it. Totally worth it. Some of the words that people use to describe how they do feel or how they want to feel instead of burned out are thriving, yes, successful, and one that comes up often that is interesting to me because I don't really resonate with it is harmonious. Like their lives are more harmonious.
Balance, maybe. I would use the word balance, but maybe that's what they mean.
Yeah. Yes, balance for sure. I actually used to have a program called Burnout to Balance. So yeah,
There you go.
balance is definitely a common one as well.
Yeah. Um, what would be your, I don't know, biggest take-home piece of advice about all this? If you want to go from what you just said, burnout to balance. I like that.
Yeah. The only other thing we haven't touched on so far that research is very clear about is having a sense of community. And this is such an interesting like thing to develop in today's world because people still feel so isolated in our culture today. I think that applies to just about everyone, that even when we're around other people, we feel like we're alone. And
Okay.
if you go to, let's just say like the waiting room at a doctor's office, what do you see? You see everyone sitting in the waiting room on their cell phones, right? Like we're together, but we're separate at the same time. So there's a lot, again, that could be said about this topic, but essentially it comes down to each individual to decide that community is important. Having close, connected relationships is essential. It's not just essential for you to feel happy right now, it's actually essential for protecting your longevity. And the research is very clear about that as well, that yes, community is an important aspect of preventing burnout, also managing burnout. So whether you want to prevent feeling burned out in the first place or you are already there, you need to find like-minded people that you can spend time with on a regular basis. And it also helps you live a longer life.
And all about the longevity, not just the quantity, how long you live, but the quality as well. I know in my life, like I don't know, burnout is the best word, but I've definitely felt emotionally exhausted, which is somewhat how you've defined burned out. And I've learned to have to just,
Yes.
one thing at a time on the to-do list. So like when I publish my book, I have, 10 other projects going on, but it's like, you know what, all those other nine are going to get set aside until this one gets done. I don't know, prioritizing, your to-do list or anything like that, that helps, but that is something that certainly has helped me. But I want to ask a couple other things, because this is something I've started doing for my life in terms of dealing with, I'll say, emotional stress, emotional exhaustion. I'm learning about something called nervous system regeneration and nervous system replenishment. Have you heard of that at all? Are you familiar with that? I'm guessing you are.
As a chiropractor, I'm a doctor of the nervous system, so I
Yeah,
hope that I
good.
know what these modalities are. The terms that you're using, I'm not specifically familiar with, but one that we talk about often in chiropractic is nervous system healing, nervous system resiliency as well.
Okay, maybe something similar. But I noticed that like I have been just like literally my nervous system has been a store, like a storage house, a warehouse, or a storage bin, if you will, for everything that happens in my life. And I let it build and build
Yes.
and build, and it stores, and it causes me, I think, that emotional stress, emotional burnout, emotional fatigue. And I've been learning to just let go of this, just let go of everything.
Mhm.
um, whatever happens, I get stopped, I get cut off in traffic, I just let it go. I get, I don't know what some other examples. I get an extra medical bill, which just happened to me, something like that. So instead of like, letting myself hold on to this, I just let it go, I guess. I don't know how quite to describe it, but that's a modality that I've been using. Is that something you're familiar with? Or what you mentioned yoga earlier. What are some other modalities that you might recommend for dealing with burnout?
Oh gosh, there are so many. I think that they're like highly individualized in regard to what do you find benefit from.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful book on this topic that I think correlates to what you're saying in regard to all of your life experiences are stored in your body, right? And specifically stored in your nervous system.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
even things that we don't consciously remember, experiences that we've had that were maybe seemingly not a big deal, we might create emotions or feelings, and those emotions that are in our body. And this also relates to PTSD, surprisingly, because it's like an event happens, there's an emotional state that then is developed or created, and when a similar event happens in the future, that emotional state comes back up. It's almost like we get consumed by that emotional state, right? And so the book that I love to refer people to on this topic is The Body Keeps the Score.
Mm.
It, it's um, it's actually kind of a weighty read. I feel like it's not easy to read and get through, but it's so essential. It's so essential to understand how our life experiences, again, even things that we don't remember, can still kind of be creating an operating system within our body now. And there are quite a few management techniques described in the book as well. For me, what it comes down to is awareness. What a term, right? Like it's kind of airy fairy, the word awareness. But even if we can just give ourselves like 60 seconds to just sit down, lay down, doesn't matter, and really tune into what am I feeling in my body? What am I actually feeling? Where am I feeling it at? And what is that telling me? It helps us start to cultivate that awareness, right? And then from the awareness is where we can make different choices. We can choose a different feeling state from that point instead of getting stuck in emotions that are not moving us toward the lives that we want to have.
How big a problem is burnout in our, I guess with women, but with men and women in our culture today? Is it like 80, 90%, or what would you say?
That's such an interesting question. I don't know a statistic that's reported on that, but there's a couple of things here. So one, the published research in regard to burnout largely focuses on, as I mentioned before, nurses and doctors, right?
Yeah.
And there's even some discussion in the clinical world that a diagnosis of burnout should be limited to healthcare providers. And I think that's really doing a disservice to all the rest of the people on the planet, because who else experiences burnout? Athletes, athletes of all
Teamwork.
kinds. So athletes that participate, teachers for sure, athletes that participate at a high level of sport or have been in multiple sports for a long time, teachers, absolutely, parents, parents experience burnout. And I think the primary reason why nurses and doctors have been studied so closely in regard to burnout is because hospital networks have a lot of money to be able to fund the research, to really look at what do they need to do to better support their employees and ensure that they have long careers. There's not as much funding available for research in regard to parenting or education or athletics, right? So all these other populations are not being looked at in regard to research. So I don't know that we really know an actual statistic of the number of people who are walking around in our culture today who would say, they feel burned out. If I had to guess, you're probably right, Brad. It would probably be
Pretty high.
80 to 90% of adults. Yeah, yeah, I would say so. Um, that could be my own personal bias because the people that I attract to me are those who are struggling with burnout in some degree at some time. Maybe not at the moment, but maybe they have experienced a feeling of burnout in the past. And so the community of people that I'm surrounded with is sort of like an echo chamber, right? Where they're like, this is a thing that we struggle with. Um, but I know secondhand through my clients who are healthcare providers, they're seeing the general population, their population of patients are coming and complaining of, they don't necessarily say they feel burned out, but they say they feel overwhelmed all the time. They're exhausted and run down.
Basically,
They feel
yeah.
overworked and underpaid,
Oh yeah.
burned out, right? Yeah. And that's the majority of their patients.
I've just real quick, I've learned to deal with a lot of that by not listening to the expectations of society and kind of living life on my own terms, I guess. So I've kind of gone down a different path.
Mm-hmm.
Not so
Yep.
much for me, life is not so much about the house or the car or the career or any of that. It's about, hey, what do I really want to experience in life? I want to experience having a podcast or living in an RV recreation trailer and living the adventurous lifestyle and traveling everywhere. So for me, a big part of that, dealing with, I guess, what you just said, the emotional overwhelmed and exhaustion and stress has been like defining my own, definition of what do I want my life to be about, and not so much what society tells me. But Danielle, I wish we had
Yeah.
more time, but is there anything else that you'd like to add to this conversation today that you haven't had a chance to say yet?
Just to follow up on what you were sharing about choosing different life experiences and not necessarily adhering to the cultural norms,
Yeah.
I think that's so important. I think that really, really is so important. Instead of chasing after the big house and the most expensive vehicles, and all of the degrees, which we've been doing for decades, it's what's got us here, right?
Cultural.
Now I'm seeing a shift in our culture, and it might be a bit early, but I am seeing a shift in our culture where people are choosing their values over their possessions. They're choosing to build a life where they are able to experience life rather than just have things. And so if you're thinking, this might apply to you as well, where it's like, yeah, I have been chasing the degrees and the fancy car and the big house, and that's not working for me anymore. But oh my gosh, what will people think of me when I don't have those things? Let me tell you, people are going to look at you as an example of how to live an awesome life.
It's funny. I get both ends. I get, wow, Brad, I'd love to have your life and all that, and plus my parents' hearts. They did not approve of my living life on my terms. They wanted me to have the house, the car, the career, all of that. So it's a catch-22 for sure. Well, gosh, this has been
Yeah.
amazing today, Danielle. Thank you. You've offered a world of insight. I think burnout in part stems, yeah, from the cultural expectations that we are a to-do society, and people will value and respect you
Mm-hmm.
for degrees that you have, the more initials you have after your name, the bigger your house, the bigger your car, the more involved in your community that you are. So if you're on the PTA or you're my case, a youth soccer coach, or volunteering, in some aspect of that, people will value that more. But if you are to a certain degree, like me too, a spiritual monk, just in the monastery, just meditating or something, people don't tend to value that as much. So yeah, it's learning to define it on your own terms. And the most important question I've ever asked myself for anyone listening is, what do you want your life to be about? And then go about setting your own definition
Mm-hmm.
of that, not what society tells you. So Danielle, if anybody wants to reach out to you,
Yeah.
in touch with you, how can they do that?
You can connect with me on Facebook and Instagram. I'm at Dr. Danielle Angela in both of those places.
Okay, and I will put that in the show notes. And you do a lot of speaking seminars. Do you have any like public webinars, seminars, anything coming up for the general population, or?
Nothing at the moment that's scheduled for the general population, but if someone wants to hear a more in-depth continuing education seminar that I've pre-recorded in the past for
Okay.
actually the Texas Chiropractic Association, I'm happy to send it to you. I have a link available for that.
Okay, sure. And anything I can just put in the show notes. Well, Danielle, thank you very much for being here. And anyone listening, thank you very much for being here and being a listener and being part of the Live Happy, Healthy, and Inspired podcast. If you got anything out of this podcast, please do me a solid and share this as far and wide as possible. The more that myself and Dr. Angela, the more that we can help others to live happy, healthy, and inspired, as I like to say, the more we can all be better and have that not just quantity of life, but quality of life as well. And while you're at it, if you are on Spotify or Apple, do me a solid as well and leave me a review. I would super appreciate that. So again, Danielle, Dr. Angela, thank you for being here. And to everyone, take care. And as I always say, be sure and live happy, live healthy, and live inspired. Keep on keeping on, everybody. We will see you next time.